Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Strengths and Weaknesses. Today we're going to be looking at the Sturgian Kingdom, the northernmost Viking-like people of Sturgia. Now these guys are a bit, depending on your campaign, they're either getting bullied or they're doing the bullying. There really is no in between. These guys either play really aggressively and are successful, or play really aggressively and get all of their land taken over very quickly. There seems to be no in-between where they just kind of have a middle ground where they're at war, but they don't lose too much. Either they just get absolutely messed up or they take a lot of land. But that doesn't really matter anyway. So as you can see, I've loaded this one up in sandbox mode as well. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's an interesting playthrough. There are some weird parts, some harder parts, and some better parts. Like the fact you can start so much further in the game and you have no quests to follow, and you can just basically do what you like. But obviously you don't have a family, and there's no real goal, there's no real quest to follow either. But it's not about that. So Sturgia. Now, one of probably the biggest strength of these guys is their infantry. Now I feel like I've said this for a fair few factions. Actually, no, that is not true. I haven't really said this yet. Battania is probably the only infantry that I've complimented so far. But Sturgia's infantry, so they're very, very heavily armoured. So a lot of people say they're quite light armoured, but that is more the lower tiers. When you get to the heavy tier, bloody hell, that was quick. When you get to the heavier tiers, the higher tiers of these guys, you get some seriously heavily armoured troops. As if we have a look into the troop tree now. So as you can see, as we're moving through, they're not very well armoured. They're quite weak in that sense, with just normal clothing really protecting them. But then you get to these bottom tiers here, and we start looking at these guys. Now I don't know how often you guys have fought these guys in battle, but they are hard to kill. These guys are really, really hard to kill. You need a very good weapon or a very strong ranged weapon to really take these guys down. But you can hit these guys so many times if you haven't spent a lot to your weapons, and they do not go down quickly. They have so much armor, so much health, and they're very good at anti-cavalry and in melee engagements as well, because they have their fine spears and their sword and shield. And if you have the axeman, you lose that spear. However, you have some amazing skirmishes with their javelins, and as you can see, these guys again are seriously heavily armoured. Not guys you want to mess with. Sturgian line breakers, so they've got no shields, but they do have a very large axe, a very large sword, and throwing axes, which are very rapid, and they can throw a lot of them quite quickly, hitting a lot of men. So very effective ranged weapon of theirs. But the best unit of this faction is probably the Sturgian heavy axemen. Now their cavalry isn't too bad. Is not too bad at all. They're quite heavily armoured, and I think that might be what goes for them the best, and the fact that they carry javelins. They're not the best cavalry. They're quite fast moving. Sorry, no, they're not quite fast moving. Sorry, they are fairly slow. They're not the best cavalry in the game, but they are fairly decent. They're not the worst either. And with their javelins, if you've got a couple of them together, and if you've only got these guys in your cavalry, then they do get a few good hits and a few good kills straight away with their javelins. So you could always use them as a hit and run instead of actually charging into the enemy. That's probably what I would use them for. That's probably what they're best used for, is their javelins. Otherwise, yeah, they're not the best. Archers. Now the archers of this faction, they're pretty good. As you can see, they've got two quivers of barbed arrows, which is more than a lot of archers in this game have. So they do carry 2 quivers with them. They're actually quite heavily armoured, so the archers themselves can be quite difficult to kill as well. Unlike most other factions, these guys do carry some armour with them. And they've got a long war sword as well, so they're quite good in melee engagements as well. But as far as they're good on ammo, very, very good on ammo. Their bow is a short bow, so their range is a little bit low. But their damage is quite high with the barbed arrows, and obviously, yeah, they have a lot of ammunition with them. And again, they're quite hard to take down. So they can get their shots off, they can stand there, take a few hits for quite a while. So quite potent. And I think that's probably the strongest thing for this faction in terms of their units. Once you get to those later stages, these guys, they are very heavily armoured. But that is more or less it's only in those later stages. And when you're dealing with the earlier stages of this faction, their units they're very fast moving. But they have very little armour to protect them early on. So you've got to be really careful of how you structure your army with these guys. I'd suggest your first move would be towards going down the Sturgian woodsman line before you try and get yourself some heavy infantry, because these guys carry javelins and they're very, very fast moving. I mean, if you send your men into a charge, these guys will always be at the enemy before anybody else. They are absolutely rapid. But yeah, you'd probably want to build up more of a force of these guys first, and maybe go down the ranged route before you try and go for the infantry route, because just with their javelins on their own, they stand a better chance of taking down the enemy than the Sturgian warriors or Sturgian soldiers. Now the soldiers aren't too bad because they have a big, they have a spear and an axe with them, so they're not too bad when they're actually in a melee engagement. Again, it's just their armor is quite poor. But if you do get through these stages, like I said, if you do manage to stay alive, keep your men alive long enough, you do start getting rewarded with some seriously heavily armed guys. And once you've got these guys in you, once you've got a few of these guys with you, you will be absolutely messing up the enemy at like 100%. You can have a bodyguard of these guys and they will not go down easy. They will not go down easy. So if you can get to that stage, they do really pay it off. It is just a case of building up to that stage. That can be quite difficult, but I think that is why it is so difficult. It's because that you get a good reward at the end of it. Yeah, the horse raiders, not bad, honestly. They're not bad troops at all. And their archers, they're not the best, but they're pretty good. Pretty heavily armoured, and they've got a lot of ammo. The barbed arrows aren't the best arrows you can find for ranged units in this game, but their armour makes up for that, really. They don't go down that easy. So I think that's one good thing with Sturgian troops, is they are quite hard to take down. So if you've got some quite high tiers with you, you should be able to stand very defensive, I think, very defensive. And they can take a punch. Now, we'll try and find one of their... we'll try and find one of their elite units somewhere, one of their noble units, while we just go through the rest of the things. So one of the main weaknesses of this faction is that they have very limited cavalry, and I think we said this about the Aserai as well. What was it? So their cavalry are best as skirmishers. They don't really have armor on their side, and they don't really have the weapons you need for anti-cavalry or anti-infantry. The only thing that really goes in their direction is the fact that most of them have javelins. And I want to try and find the elite units. I can't remember exactly what they're called. It does seem to be quite hard to find them, but I'm sure we will at some point. But yeah, so actual cavalry and how many there are and how many you have to pick from, there aren't too many, and it's quite limited. You don't really have that elite unit of cavalry like you do with the Imperials or the Valandians. You don't have that elite cavalry unit. You just kind of get the skirmisher, sort of medium armor for these guys. They have their javelins, but otherwise they're nothing special. You're just putting a skirmisher on a horse and sending him off. Really, they're not that great. And you don't really have the option for anyone else. Their elite unit does change it up a little bit, but not massively. They're still not the best cavalry. As far as, yeah, like I said, I've kind of already covered the point with the armor. So obviously the low level troops, they're weak. They're very weak in their lower tiers, but their high tiers do make up for that. Also, their positioning on the map, on the actual world map, is tactical to a point. So you have sort of limited entries. So you're not really surrounded by enemies. You've got nobody to your north, nobody to your really left or right. You kind of just have this nice little area, quite defendable positions. If you're fighting around Tial area, you've only really got the two enemies and some very, very short passages where they can actually get through to you. So if they were going to attack from the Khuzaits, they would have to sort of come through Urixala Castle, so here. So you know where they're going to come from, and you can mount quite a good defence without them slipping through, because I don't even think they can actually get through this gap here. Yeah, it does say, I think it's blocked off there. So they have to come through Urixala Castle or go the very, very, very long way around to try and hit your flank here. So if you are at war with another faction, it's quite easy to predict where they're going to come from. It's a little bit harder with the Northern Empire because they're stretched quite wide across the top here. So they could attack to Omor or Tial, but then again, you have these two very narrow passageways, and Omor. Well, if you lose Omor, it kind of makes it easier for yourself, because then you have this just bridge which then connects to the main Sturgian land. So if you lost this area, then you can fall back to a very, very easily defendable position. So their position on the world map isn't the worst, isn't the best, but you can, if you look at it strategically, it can work to your advantage. Places like Revel as well, it is literally a one-in, one-out system. So you can use that to your advantage, especially when they implement the the battle terrain system, and you can use these tight passages as very defendable positions. Like here as well, you got that little passageway, and that's the only real way to actually get round to Revel. So you can cut these places off with key positionings. You do start with Nevyank's castle, which is kind of annoying, and there's not real much point of trying to defend it if you are fighting for this faction, because it is so far away. It's going to go down. Likewise, you could use it as a mounting point to launch an invasion against the other factions, but ideally it's better to just let it go, and then nobody will be running all the way across to try and save it, and they'll just stick to your own borders. So I'd say the absolute best thing about this faction, and this is going to go back to the units, is if you're going to look at formations, so the best thing about these guys is they provide probably one of the best melee infantry, but not in the terms of what you're thinking, because I'm sure you're shouting, no, I think the Battanians are better, or no, I think the Imperial guys are better. But no, if you're going for a shield wall, this is the best faction. If you get those Sturgian spearmen and Sturgian heavy axemen in a shield wall, you will have the best shield wall you can possibly get, and you will not find a better unit that can hold a heavy armoured, with the right weapons. You've got your axemen and your spearmen, and if you had them side by side, you've got the strongest shield wall you can possibly have in this game. You've got seriously heavy armoured. Those guys aren't going down. Shield walls are generally meant to hold the enemy in that position. You're not playing aggressively, you're playing defensively, and with these units, these top tier units, you're going to get that completely and utterly get that for you. Like, it's just going to work completely in your favour. So that's what you kind of really got to look at. See if we can find these guys. I know they're on here somewhere. Or Troki. So yeah, so we'll go in just before I stop. These are the elite units here. So you start off with your infantry. Now the Variags, they're not bad. They're kind of a mid-tier unit. They've got a mix of weapons. So they've got their throwing axes, their spears, and if I'm completely honest, I prefer these guys as infantry over cavalry. As you can see, they do have sort of heavily armoured horses and heavy armour themselves. They do have lances, but they're quite short lances. They're not the best. But yeah, generally I prefer these guys as infantry, and I'd kind of prefer it if they did make them infantry, because this faction is better suited for heavy infantry, and I feel like they needed that over cavalry. It's good to have this extra bit of cavalry, and like I said, they're quite well armoured, but again, they're really not the best cavalry in the game. They're quite slow moving, and they're not the best. They would have been better off as infantry, but the Variag veterans, they're pretty good, pretty middling tier units, as they should be. So they're not the worst. Now, as far as economics, so usually from most of these places up here, because it's kind of snowy and in the north, you can get very cheap hides and leather and things like that here, and you can sell them off elsewhere, like in the Empire or down in Azerai, and make a lot of money for it. You can buy a lot of things very cheaply up here. Food especially, food is very cheap up in Sturgia. And yeah, you've got a lot of resources, like I said, like the furs and the leathers and the things like that you can get that are very cheap as well. You can also get some very heavy armours from the markets here as well. So you can really kit yourself out quite nicely with some good armour in these places. I'm pretty sure there was another point, but I can't remember what it was. I'm sure I'll stick it down in the comments if I remember it by the time this episode ends. But yeah, Sturgia as a whole, it's not a bad faction. You get some really, really good infantry, and if you can get a mix of Sturgian heavy infantry with, say, Battanian Fian archers, and then some either like Vlandian or Imperial cataphracts, you could have a really, really strong force there. The Druzinic champions, again, they're not the worst, but they're not the best cavalry either. And you'll get a lot of Sea Raiders, that is it. So in most of the map you won't find Sea Raiders, but in Sturgia and Valandia, especially at the north, so around this sort of area, you'll find Sea Raiders all over the place. Now, Sea Raiders are probably the hardest looted categories to fight in the field. They come incredibly heavy armoured, usually with javelins and packing decent weaponry as well. But that's why it's really good that they're in this area. So yes, it's going to be quite hard. Yes, you might get caught out if you're quite a small force of maybe just recruits. They will absolutely dominate you if that is the case. Even if you've got 20 men and they've only got them, say, 7 or 8, these guys are seriously packing gear. They're carrying seriously heavy armour and seriously good weapons, so they will kick your ass. So you do have to be careful about that, but at the same time, really good way of getting money because obviously they carry such good gear. If you do defeat them, you're going to get a lot of money for selling off their kit. Also, they make good prisoners. You can sell them off for a lot as well. And generally, if you capture them, you're getting some really good units straight away. You're getting some really, really good units. I've always been a fan of recruiting the Sea Raider units you can get, because they're always quite good. They always perform very well in battle, even along those top tier units. So you can get some really good units out of them as well. And if you've got the conversion perk, I can't remember exactly what they convert into, but I'm pretty sure it's the Driznik champions, or at least a very good unit from them. So you can always have that as advantage as well. But yeah, the Sea Raiders only really spawn in Sturgia and at the north of Valandia around Revolt and Ostican, but mostly around this sort of area. So they're very good to take down, very good for money, and very, very, very good for experience as well. If you take them down, you do get a lot of experience for yourself and your troops. So it's good to hunt down, but at the same time, it can also be a disadvantage because they are very strong. So if you want to be a trader for a little while, or just have a small force so you're not paying out too much, you do have to keep an eye out for these guys. Because yeah, a large force of them will mean trouble for you. So you do have to watch out for that. Right, that is all I can think of for the moment, guys. I'm sorry if I've missed anything. Like I said, I'll make sure I put it down in the comments below if I remember anything. But this is just a very brief, basic guide on strengths and weaknesses to Sturgia. I hope this has helped. I hope this has piqued your interest. If it has, please let me know down in the comments below. If you've got any suggestions, comments, tips, or anything like that, please let me know down in the comments, and make sure to get a message sent to me on Discord as well. And I haven't been replying recently to a lot of things, because I'm sure, as many of you already know, as I've said before, things have been very different for me at the moment, and I have kind of had to hang back a little bit on this, just because there's been a lot of changes in my life recently. But I am getting back there. I will get back on top of it all. Hopefully it won't take much longer. There's going to be a move coming up for me in a couple of weeks, so that is going to probably take some of my time away again, but I will try and get everything sorted by then. Make sure I have enough things to come out to keep you guys entertained. So if I haven't replied to one of your comments, sorry, that was my point I was trying to make. I have not forgotten about it. If anything, I probably have read it and just not replied, but I will get back to you. I do read them all. Honestly, don't worry about it. I read every single one, so I will try and get back to you as soon as I can. So don't be afraid to send me one. I will get back to you, even if it does take a few days. I'm sorry. I will try and get on top of it in the future, and make sure I reply it as soon as possible. But yeah, for the moment, I will get back to you. Just give me a bit of time. But otherwise, guys, I hope you've had a good one. I hope everything's going well for you guys, and I will speak to you soon in the next episode. I'll try and make the next one a little bit better, make some more notes, because I think we're going to be doing the Imperials and then the Khuzaits. But yeah, Sturgia is not one of my favourite factions, so honestly I've just tried to cover as much as I know about them, but I don't usually play Sturgia, so I have done what I thought was best. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Goodbye.